Hi, I'm Tom Stevenson and welcome to Construction Business Management. This is the last in this course and series that we've been doing on this topic of how to start, manage, and run a successful construction business. So I thought today would be a good day to kind of take a few minutes to really review what we've been looking at over this whole course, which is quite a lot of stuff when it comes down to it. And to be honest, there's a whole bunch of individual courses that you could actually take on various topics that you could really get into the weeds on. But I think we did a pretty good job of giving you a good sense of what it takes to run a successful construction business, and also looking at it from different viewpoints and the different types of construction businesses that are possible, whether it's a small renovation company, a custom home building company, a extremely large commercial enterprise doing institutional, commercial, industrial type projects, pretty much the full gambit of different types of businesses in the construction sector, and trying to come to grips with all the things that you need to understand. You don't have to be necessarily an expert in everything, but I think if you're going to run a business, you have to have some understanding of how the pieces fit together. So I'm hoping that today we'll take a high-level view and it'll start to crystallize all these little nodes that you've got going on in your brain, and then the little gray cells, so to speak, and pull them together. So that's why I'm calling it the pieces to the puzzle, construction business management. And I thought it'd be helpful to use a mind map. Mind maps are a very helpful tool to be able to clarify things and understand how things fit together when you're looking at processes. I use them for things like project management, a construction project, how it all goes together and the different components. And I think it's helpful to look at it from what we've covered in this course, and more importantly, to run a successful construction business. And I think before you start a construction business, it's quite helpful to look at it overall, the different components and how they actually fit together. So we really did cover the purpose, and I'll get into each one of these in a few minutes, but the purpose of your business, your strategy, where you want to go. We looked at the financials. We didn't try to make you accountants, but we really wanted you to understand the different statements, the ratios, concepts like return on investment, and how they can be utilized to help you develop really good targets to move your business towards. We talked about marketing. How do we market the business? And within marketing, we talked about a whole bunch of things. We talked about sales. We talked about negotiating. We talked about the 4 Ps. So we talked about quite a few things under marketing. HRM, people and culture, your people. And we did talk a little bit about operations, although this one we were probably pretty light on because that's getting into more the technical side of running the business. You know, what type of business that you're running in and the technical side. But we'll talk about them all right now and make sure you have a good idea of how they come together. Because sometimes when you learn things individually, it's very esoteric and you don't really see how it fits into the big picture. And to run a successful business, you have to know how the different parts come together. We also talked about the external environment at various points in the course too, relating to the external environment, what's going on and how that impacts your business. These are things that are outside your individual control that are happening that will have impacts and influence on your business. So we'll start out with the purpose icon over here, or bubble, in our mind map. And we did talk about mission, vision, core values, if you can recall. And by the way, if you haven't seen these or you've forgotten them from earlier on, if you click subscribe and you go to the playlist Construction Business Management, you'll see all the videos in this particular course. And you can go back and you can reference them, or if you haven't had a chance to look at them, it's a good idea to take a look. It'll make a lot more sense that way. So we talked about mission, the purpose of the business, looking out to the future, where you see the business going. We talked about core values. What are the values of this business, and really trying to create a culture around that. By the way, all of these nodes or clouds, if you will, they interact with each other. So they're not mutually exclusive. They really interact with each other. So if we're talking about core values and trying to set up a culture, well, that ties in a huge way to human resource management, people and culture. So there's a lot of interconnectedness that goes on. And part of the purpose aspect is setting a strategy and goals. Where do you want to take the business, the vision, and then getting into the goals of how you're going to get there, right? So these are more of the other points that are more clear. We talked about SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. We talked about developing a business strategy, the nuances of trying to maneuver, and how things in the external environment might create opportunities, but at the same time they might create threats, like a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But the strategy needs to be developed so we can determine where we want to take the business. And of course, overarching this, we talked about developing a business plan and structuring a business plan that helps you clarify where you want to take your business. It may be a requirement for your business as far as financial requirements if you're seeking loans and that sort of thing, but it may also be a tool that can help you have a direction of where you're going. You know, if you really don't have any goals, you're kind of just like floating in the ocean, and it's going to take you wherever you go. If you have some goals, doesn't mean you can't change them, doesn't mean you can't iterate, adjust, but it does give you some purpose, does give you some direction, and does give you some motivation, engagement, and clarity for your people as well. So we definitely went into that quite substantially, and it's important for all of those reasons. And we talked about some of the limitations. You know, if people just do it, go through the motions, and, you know, if you're a leader of this company or a manager and you're kind of going through the motions, your people will pick up on that very quickly, and it won't be very useful as a tool. That's why it doesn't work in a lot of cases, because it's something that people just paste on a wall, or maybe they say it, but they don't mean it, that sort of thing. The next area that we got into quite substantially was the financials and understanding your financials. You know, you're not going to stay in business very long if you don't understand how the business makes profit, and you don't understand whether it's making profit, and you don't understand where your costs are, where your overheads are, how your cash flow is. So we looked at all the statements and got a good grasp of what each one's purpose is and some of the advantages. And we also went through some of the financial ratios and how they can help clarify and give you some indication to the overall health of the business. So obviously, if we're going down a path and we're trying to see what we want to do and achieve, we need to monitor how we're doing. We need to set targets. We need to have a good idea of what the risks are, and we need to monitor it. And we talked about return on investment. We use that as a concept. And I think in one of the video lectures, I gave an example of home building and how you could look at that as a return on investment strategy if you were trying to purchase properties, put highest and best use, a building on it, be it a house or what have you, and then sell it. And what does it mean, return on investment? And how do you compare that to investing in, say, the stock market, or investing in, say, investing just putting in a savings account? I wouldn't call it investing, but very low risk elements. And so what's the risk reward, and how does that work together, and what are the thoughts on that? And you should have a good understanding of that if you're going to run a business, because there's a lot of opportunities there, but you also want to know the risks. And if you're taking on a lot of risk without a lot of reward, that doesn't make a lot of sense in most cases. And it's surprising how people get themselves into that kind of corner. The other area that I kind of talked about throughout the course at different times, depending what I was talking about. I think it was kind of in this order, though. That's why I'm keeping it in this order, just as this review process. We talked about the external environment, and really this ties to a lot. I've got a lot of sort of individual points here that I can really capitalize on when we talk about construction businesses as an example, but this is long studied. This is Business 101, the external environment. There's different models for it. Probably one of the most well-known one is PESTEL. And PESTEL stands for, if I get it right here, let's see, political. The idea of an acronym is you remember it, right? Political is for the P. The E is economic. The S is social. The T is technological. The L is legal. And the E is environmental. PESTEL. I think it was EL. I got it mixed up there. But each one of these is under those particular areas that I mentioned. I just didn't use the acronyms in this particular case because I think I could go through it better from a construction point of view. Regulatory. Well, that can be everything from building codes to safety regulations. That can also be governmental regulations. All of those things that come into play are regulatory. And that's an external environment. So you can be impacted from it if you are running a business. Building code changes can impact your business, for sure. Safety regulations can impact your business. Good thing about regulatory tends to be that it impacts everybody in your sector's business. So that's a good thing. So it means your competition has to face it as well. So things like increased safety standards are a good thing. Because that means everybody's having to do it, and you should be operating safety and above the regulations anyway, so it'll more affect companies that aren't. So from a regulatory perspective, that's one that affects businesses. Political. Well, you know, if you've been in North America the last few years, there's been a lot of negotiations, for example, on free trade between Canada and the United States, Mexico, and a lot of back and forth. And there's been intermediate tariffs and different things like on steel. And if you use a lot of steel for reinforcing, that can have an impact on your business. So for sure, political changes can have those kind of impacts. And by the way, these aren't mutually exclusive. A lot of times they cross each other, right? Because social has a big impact on political, because if there's this whole social movement, that has an impact on who gets elected, and then the politicians want to put in regulations. So you can see how these interact with each other in a lot of ways. Social could be that there's as there has been, a huge movement on climate change and a lot of pressure on the political and regulatory side. Well, if you're in construction, that may present a lot of opportunities. Perhaps you could be involved in building net zero housing, houses that produce as much energy as they consume. There's all kinds of opportunities that open up because of these things. Now, does it mean that you would have to, as a business, become more trained on it, more educated on it? Will it take some time and effort? Yes, but if you actually are pretty quick about it, you can develop a competitive advantage. And that's, you know, over here, how competitive is your sector, right? How competitive is your sector? How much competition outside your company? You can't control that external competition, but in some cases you can lead it. In some cases you can take advantage to certain situations that are occurring, and that can be advantageous. Economic. Well, if we are in a recession or interest rates are pretty high, that could have drastic impacts on your ability to procure work. If your government, so getting back to political and geographic, if your particular government is kind of tapped out, they've been developed big deficits, that might make it difficult. So they might cut back on infrastructure projects. And if you're in the infrastructure sector, that could impact you. Or if you're not in the infrastructure sector, you could have people that are in the infrastructure sector moving to another sector, then that could make it more competitive. So there's all these interactions that take place. And of course, I mentioned with social, well, that can affect the environmental, like we said, with climate change, or a whole host of other ones, geographic, the external area that you work in. There can be certain different changes due to the topography and the climate and other things that need to consider when you're doing work in those particular areas. And we did talk about technological change right off the bat when we talked about how things were changing and how some companies that were leaders in their sectors have disappeared. And if you're not mindful of those things, that in a business perspective, things change so quickly, you're left behind the eight ball. You can't catch up, and then your business just sort of withers away. So the external environment is something that's very important for us to consider. It's not something that we control, but it's something that we can take hints from, that we can help to integrate with our purpose and our strategy and our goals, and that can be very useful for us. So it's good to have a good understanding of that and be attuned to some of the opportunities that can come as a result of that. We did spend a fair bit of time looking at marketing. I could have put sales and marketing. I kind of lump it under the whole thing, but very often they'll say sales and marketing. Sometimes they'll call it SAM. But really, the marketing is that whole process. And I think of marketing, I think of the 4 P's: place, price, product, promotion. And we looked at those. Where is your business? And if you're buying land and developing it, which place are you buying it at? What are you developing? Right? Are you a home builder? Are you a shopping mall builder? Are you a mixture of a whole bunch of different things because you're like a big entity? Depends, right? So your product might be a lot of things, or it might be a niche of things. Very difficult to do everything. Even the biggest construction companies that I know of, they do a lot, but they don't necessarily do everything. And they know where their strengths are as well. They might sometimes take on something that's a little outside their thing because it's such a good opportunity, price-wise or profitability-wise. But generally, they know what their segments are and how do you focus on that market segment. And we tried to identify, there are different types of models: B2B, business to business; B2C, business to customer. And we talked about the nuances between that. If I'm doing a lot of institutional work and I'm dealing with a facilities department and a project manager that works for that facilities, I've got to think about things a little bit differently than if I'm going into somebody's house and I'm doing a renovation, or it's individual customers. Also, if it's a big entity that I'm doing work with, this could be an ongoing thing that every year I get so much work from that particular entity. We talked about the Pareto principle and how the Pareto principle is helpful to understand, and we want to retain 80% of our clients because it's so much easier to keep clients than to go looking for new ones. We talked about the different aspects of sales, and we talked about how everybody is selling and everybody's negotiating all the time. It's an ongoing process. You want to take it as skills that you can build as a small business owner or a medium business owner or any type of manager that's working. You're always selling and negotiating. You're selling and negotiating with your trade partners, with your employees, with your clients, with your consultants. So it's an ongoing process that's quite involved. We spent a fair bit of time on human resource management, people and culture. And we talked about the nuanced differences between leadership and management, and what are the positives of both, and how can we combine those skills and do some self-evaluation of where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are and how we can get better at them. So that was quite an in-depth discussion. Hiring people. And as Jim Collins says, if we can hire the most already motivated people that are passionate about the work that they do, most of our work is done. We've just got to make sure that we don't do things that demotivate them or disengage them in that case. So definitely there's a lot to the hiring process. There was a lot of discussion on the motivation aspects. We talked about intrinsic and extrinsic and how that fits into reward systems, how one lasts over another. And there's distinguishments to be made, and how you want to really look at those particular areas and see how you can fit those parts of the puzzle for your particular business. What's an ideal kind of reward system for your people, or do you know your people well enough to engage them in the projects that would be of most interest to them? A lot of times, if you really understand your people, that's a pretty easy thing to do. If you don't, a lot of times it's not that easy, and then you hit and miss with it. And making sure that you're providing feedback on what they do well, feedback on where they need improvements, and if you give honest feedback with the aspect of you want to improve them over the long term, that you're trying to help that individual to get better, they buy into it. I buy into it because I feel you have my back. I feel you want me to improve. And if you have an internal labor market, how that person can do better within your company, you'll retain them longer. It's very competitive business construction. Very difficult to keep people and to get the best people. But if you build a reputation amongst your people that this is a great place to work, construction, as I've said, it's a big industry, but it's a small industry. The word spreads fast, and you keep your people. They'll think twice before they want to go somewhere else. And your best people, maybe they start their own business at some point. Well, you know what? Then you're going to have at least good, well-trained, qualified competition, which is a lot better than having to deal with unscrupulous kind of competition. So there's a lot of positives that we can look at from running a business in this perspective. And operations. As I said, we didn't spend too much time, but I did spend a bit of time talking about systems and how systems fit together with goals and how that can make us operate our business much more effectively. Methodology, that's getting into the actual doing of things and how you do it, which again, that's going to lead to productivity improvements, which are going to lead to profitability. So these are very important elements. It's just that I didn't have time to spend a ton of time in this particular course. But you can look at site management videos and other videos that I have on the YouTube channel and dive into those areas if you like. But definitely developing systems, habits, routines, rituals within the business, and understanding, what's the best technology to adapt and adopt not always going after the shiny object and not necessarily going after the bleeding edge of technology, but what's going to fit your business without ignoring the changes that are taking place in your marketplace. And so all of these points, as I've just gone through them, it's not like I can say, this is the most important. This is the most important. I feel that this is almost like you see these arrows going in. It's like a giant bicycle wheel with all these spokes that go into it. And if you're really out of touch with any of them, they can really put a wheel out of alignment. And that can cause problems within the business. So that's why it's difficult to find businesses that have lasted 100+ years, generation to generation, that survived all of that. Very few and far between. Because you only have to mess up, seriously once, and the business is done. But if you build a really good structure and you follow these nodes and you do a really good job of it in the various elements, it'll help to give you a really good core fundamental business with positive, engaged people, which will lessen the likelihood of those kind of cataclysmic events that befall a lot of businesses. So hopefully through this course, you've been able to get a good sense of the different components. And like I said earlier in the course, if you never start a business, it doesn't matter. You're working for somebody then. It's really, if you work for me and you have a really good understanding how this fits together, you're a valued employee because you really understand the big picture. You're really good at what you do, but you also understand the big picture. Try to be able to make that shift between the granular to the macro to the granular, and that will be very helpful as well. So that's what I wanted to discuss today and wrap this particular course up. I'm going to still be posting lots of videos on business management tips and dive more into the weeds on specific topics because this is a never-ending journey of learning. So I'm Tom Stevenson, wishing you a wonderful day and a wonderful career, and we'll see you next time. Don't be afraid to leave comments, and if you enjoyed this course or these lectures, please click the likes, and we'll see you in the future. Bye for now.